So, this is a conversation for us to talk about some of the issues around AI and how, as individuals, as professionals in this area, we can make sense, not just for ourselves, but for our colleagues, friends, families, organisations, as to some of the things they need to be thinking about beyond the shiny tools, because people are very caught up with the technology, what it can do and what it might do, but we're not really stopping to ask the question why and whether we should be doing this in such a rush, because the only people who, in my opinion, benefit from that rush are those who are operating this for profit, not progress. Our conversation today will cover off a few things and then we'll see where that takes us. And hopefully we might make sense of something small. If we do that, then I think it will have been a good conversation. So, Sonya, would you like to tell us a bit about the cyber psychology aspect of all of this? And then perhaps we'll go to Elif to talk a bit about the reason why we should be doing it rather than the shiny tools. And then perhaps Yasmine, you would enlighten us on some of your thinking around GEO. How does that sound? And then I might have a little rant about a few things and we'll see where we go with that. So, Sonia, would you like to start us off?
Yes. Would you like me to do an introduction?
Yes, do.
Okay. So I'm Sonya Cullington. I have about 25 years experience in UK public sector comms and policy development, and the sort of latter decade of that I was involved in health tech transformation. So that would be things like electronic patient record rollouts and things like that in hospitals. During that time, I found that a lot of the transformation, whatever that means in health, was around sort of doing behavioural change trapped onto sort of the technology rollouts. But each time we did that and trust to trust, there was something not quite right. You know, you'd have your CIOs stood on the doorstep saying, this is amazing. Look at the green dashboard, everything rollout's brilliant. Look at the adoption rate. And then you would have, nurses crying in the wards and really stressed. And then sort of 6 to 9, 12 months later, you would get a turnover in that staff rotation. And each time we sort of went that, it was a different change methodology was tried, but still something was a bit off, which is where I found cyber psychology. And that gave me the language for what I was seeing that kind of traditional change management didn't touch. And so what I've been focusing on over the last 4 or 5 years is around what is it that we are humans, what's changing within us when we work so closely with AI, and particularly now with generative AI. And I think, like a lot of us would agree with, is the narrative that we've been pushed in terms of buy this, use this, you'll be behind if you don't do it. This is where we're going from. This is what you need to get on board with. Do more with less. This will save you. Buy this tool. It's shiny. Go with it. And there's that snowball. And nobody's really stopped and thought about, actually, there are some lessons we can learn from history here, i.e. social media. So why are we rushing so quickly to have generative AI in every element of our lives? What is the impact on that? We know from social media the detriments it can have on the human and the human mind and the cognitive impairment and all of those things, yet we're still running ahead at a million miles an hour to get more buttons to press during our working day and during our personal lives. So my focus has been actually on taking that step back, on having that slower pace, and really thinking, it goes back to just because you can doesn't mean you should, I guess, which is all of it. I think you can kind of have that for lots of things, but with generative AI in particular, I've talked a lot about time saved and what does that mean. So it's going from, lots of people are going from A to Z with outputs very, very quickly, and now are not being able to justify or even on a basic level, just explain the content of what they're producing, because they're in that pressure and that time to kind of get more done, push more out. This is where we're going. Actually, when it comes to healthcare, which is my speciality, there's a lot of professional identity challenges that are coming forward. If you spoke to a nurse, for example, and a community health nurse, and they'd say, well, I never got into nursing to press buttons, to use a computer, to follow my tablet around all day carrying this. So if you're telling me that this tablet I now have to carry around is doing most of the job that I used to do, who am I now? And there's lots of stories. I've been to a lot of conferences this year, and people have gone and talked about it and gone, the answer is more training. Actually, it's not. It's not more training in tool functionality. It's not more training in which button to press in which order. It's having that human to human conversation about your role redevelopment. What does that look like now? What are the elements that you as a human are still able to provide to that service? That is the core concepts that we need to kind of get our heads around, I think, rather than adding more training, adding another tool, adding something else that will be quicker, because those community nurses might be doing admin quicker, but they're not logging off earlier. They're not having long lunch breaks. They're not reducing their load. They're not even their mental load. So it might look on the surface like they're having less admin to do, but actually what's happening is the system is just pushing more people through. So they're seeing more people, but the administrative side of that might be dwindling, but they're seeing more people, so the cognitive and the mental load is increasing, so therefore we see a higher rate of burnout in the longer term. So I think those are the things that we need to focus on as a society in terms of the general impact on us as humans when it comes to using this technology all day, every day, and that sustained use that we have.
That's really interesting, because I think it's wider as well than the healthcare field.
Yeah,
I think it goes across all of society in terms of not simply our own personal and professional identity, but our societal identity.
yeah.
What's the effect of this on the way that we live together, on the way that we engage? And one of the things that I've been involved with for a long time is looking at, from a practitioner, public relations, communication perspective, where we are concerned with the human relationship, we're also needing to be concerned with the human AI relationship and how that acts as an intermediary between us, each other. There's been a lot of conversation around AI as a stakeholder, which I'm not a fan of, because it's not a stakeholder, it's a technology. If there were stakeholders to be found, it would be those who are deploying the technology, which is kind of that step back that I think you were talking about. That central question that you have is the one I think we've all got to collectively try and make sense of, and that's, where are we going with this? Can we design a world that works with it and supported by it, rather than have it dominate? And I think that's where your thinking comes in as well, doesn't it, Elif?
Yeah, so while Sonya was speaking, I was thinking about the professional identity part. So let me address that. Then I think I'm owed a official introduction before I share my rant. But as Sonya was speaking, the professional identity thing is so important, because I think there's a part of your professional identity that you're going to have to mourn, because, for example, for communications practitioners, if you built your entire career on copywriting or media relations, that's pretty much part of your corporate identity. And now that might not be the main thing that allows you to do your job. So I think everyone needs to recognize that there's a loss. There's almost like a shedding you have to do on your professional identity. Sonya was saying, for example, people are asking, well, if the tool is doing so and so, who am I? And I think that's the scary part of this. And that's why I think rather than thinking about who am I, because that's a scary question, people are navigating more to tools because that's an easier thing. Changing your day to day, bolting on AI because you're doing something socially acceptable. You're experimenting with AI, maybe you're gaining efficiencies, you look up to date, and then you defer that secret, scary question of, okay, well, what is it changing about my role and what does that mean for my corporate identity? And I think that's where a lot of the leaders are deferring that structural question of what AI is changing. And I kind of culminate that in a framework I published on how communication leaders should think about AI. It's called the 2 clocks. And while Sonya was thinking, I was thinking about that. So you have the immediate clock, which is what I described, the day-to-day demands. If you think about a comms professional, media monitoring, reputation management, GEO, that's your kind of day-to-day thing, and you're more invested in that. And then you have the structural clock, which is more silent, which is looking at, well, what is AI changing? And I think most importantly, breaking in the system you work in, your role exists in, and then what you need to actually become. How do you need to redesign yourself? How do you need to redesign your team to be able to meet the needs? And I think the reason people are deferring that is exactly what Sonya was talking about, because it's a loss of personal identity. You have to be vulnerable. You have to openly dismantle the value proposition. Maybe you carry it for years and then experiment with a new one, create a new one. And the scary thing is it's not once, because AI is changing so quickly. You're going to have to do this consistently. As the world moved on, you're like, okay, this was my value. Now it has changed. You have to do that painful deconstructing and reconstructing, I think, consistently. And that's what I think is stopping primarily. That's the personal tension underneath as to why people are not thinking about that structural, I think, question of what AI is changing. And before I kind of talk about, my background, this is the question I kind of spend a lot of time on. What is AI changing? Because I think we're not thinking about that enough. We're more focused on chasing the next tool. We feel bad if we don't know how the next tool is working. And the scary thing is by the time you learned it, something has changed already. So you're constantly behind. And I think it's creating a lot of anxiety in people. So my position on this is stop chasing the tool, but start to chase the changing basis of value. What has changed? If you look at communication, for example, now reputation management starts not from a blank page, but it starts from a machine-made baseline. Before you speak to any stakeholder, there's a good chance they have asked AI about it and it handed over a version of you. So for every conversation you have, there's a good chance AI has gotten there first. When it comes to how you lost reputation, we talked about the traceability of decisions. When you look at that on an organizational level, in the good old days with crisis management, for example, you can trace it back. Someone has made a decision and that led to a reputational event. So you can reconstruct that and that becomes the basis for your crisis management. But in this new environment we live in with AI, who made the decision? I don't know. What's the sequence of events? I don't know. The crisis or event happens within the system. For example, prompt injections, hallucinations. You can't reconstruct that fast enough to intervene in it. That means that both in the way you build reputation and you maintain it has significantly changed. So in that environment, bolting on AI to an existing workflow is investing in an old value system that has already moved on. And that's kind of my thinking around this for everyone, especially knowledge workers. What is AI changing? What is AI breaking? And what is the new basis of value for the domain you work in? What are the cracks AI creates? Accountability, risks, those are going to be the new areas you're going to have to reconstruct your value proposition around. So this is kind of the area I think about it. And the way I got there is I've been working with the communication function for about 16 years, or seen it from every single angle. Started out in global PR agencies, Ogilvy, Edelman, and then I went in-house and led the launch of a multi-billion-dollar company and the creation of its corporate communications function. And then I've been with RepTrack for the last 7 years, which is a reputation intelligence company. So I kind of seen communication from every single angle. And I think that's how I'm able to see what AI is breaking and what we need to do, which is stop chasing the next tool, look at the bigger picture of what it is changing, how your role needs to evolve with it. So start there. The tools to use is, for me, the last question you have to start with.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. It reminds me of my ongoing analogy, which I've been knocking out for many years now, is that you wouldn't put an engine on a horse to make it go faster, because you're just going to end up killing the horse. And at the moment, that's what's happening, is people are trying to bolt the new technologies or the available technologies onto old ways of doing things. And it neither fits in the end. How do you see this, Yasmine, particularly with encouraging people to be involved with it and not be afraid to learn about it and move forward with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I found a stat that said that women are using AI less than men, and that's because they felt like it was cheating. And I think that does kind of feed into this conversation, because perhaps women are actually more aware or more hesitant to use technology that isn't exactly up to scratch, or is potentially losing their professional identity or cutting corners that may kind of damage the output at the end. But the concern with that is that if women shy away from technology that is probably here to stay, then we can't be involved in the solution and in improving the technology, and also raising awareness among the communities that we work in and that we live in of the challenges and that the concerns that there are. If you don't understand it, then you don't know. So for example, so I'm a PR director, have been in the comms industry for 16 years, and I've built a particular interest in GEO naturally, as it has implications on how we consult our clients. And I'm the author of the GEO Nerd Substack. And the whole purpose of that was to, first of all, educate myself and to have an opportunity to research and to really look into. I'm not someone that will just take what anyone tells me as Bible. I'll go out and research it myself. But in doing that research, I'm finding that even while I'm trying to put together an advice article, and I'm in doing my research, I'm getting lots of different facts through from AI and from my own Google searching and from other people that have read something they saw on LinkedIn at some point, but they don't know where the fact came from. And the point is that people are trying to hack GEO to an extent where they put content on their website that they believe AI would like to read, whether it's true or not, or based on anything substantial, any kind of actual data. And then AI is then scraping that as fact. And so then users who don't understand that are, using ChatGPT, for example, and then they'll tell their friend, or their mother, their neighbor, their whoever, oh, I read this thing that ChatGPT told me XYZ, not realizing that's come from information that isn't accurate. So I think my point is that as comms professionals, we've got a role to play within that. We're not going to, AI is going to hallucinate, and people will to use it for their everyday needs, likely for different research needs, or for their work, or for their, how to plant. I was doing it the other day, how to plant a banana tree in my garden, things like that. If you don't have anyone to ask, a real human to ask, then it is a useful tool. But if you don't understand that people are trying to hack the system with potentially not accurate information or insight that's just something they've created because they think it will work for GEO, then that's really damaging. And we've seen that Reddit was previously one of the most cited domains on ChatGPT, suddenly disappeared a couple of weeks ago. And everyone in the comms industry was saying, oh no, that was our new strategy. What we're going to do? Have we gone down the wrong route? Well, the fact was you shouldn't have been hacking or trying to hack Reddit in the first place. It's meant to be a public forum, and that's meant to be a place of authentic reviews and opinions. What I think is worthwhile is being kind of a Reddit community manager, or at least kind of monitoring what's being said on Reddit in order to consult your clients. And, you know, this is what the people online say about your product or your company. So it's useful insight for us, but don't necessarily try to hack it with fake subthreads and all of that, because back in 2011, the SEO industry was punished for that when they tried to hack Google with fake or paid for backlinks, many like piles and piles of articles that was jam-packed with keywords just to try and get that SEO ranking, and then they were punished, and Google rolled out the updates that caused them to lose their traffic overnight, and it took them many years, if many months, not years, to recover from that. That's what's happening today. People are creating new websites that are full of GEO, listicles, or they're putting FAQs on their websites or lists on their websites, best service for XYZ, and then put themselves at the top among their competitors, but obviously biased towards themselves. And I think that that's not only inauthentic, and people will see through that if they really understand it, but you will be punished at some point. The technology will start to catch up and you will be eradicated from the GEO. So the point is to understand how it works as someone who's in the comms industry, and don't try to follow the hack. Remember your integrity and your professionalism as a comms individual, and then utilize the insights in a way that will help to consult your clients. But we can do it in a way that backs your ethics. And I also found that a lot of people that aren't in AI or don't understand how AI works, particularly AI engines, they are coming to me having started the GeoNerd Substack and saying, I read XYZ the other day. And I said, did you kind of research it to double check the facts? And then they went ahead and they realized it was just one blog that had, again, just trying to hack the system. So understanding how it works is really helpful, not only for your professional life, but your personal life. Also in the healthcare side of things, Sonya, I'm really alarmed by how the extent of which people are using AI engines for medical needs. And I know some of them are now saying, we are an AI tool, you need to see a professional. But people don't, especially men, we know they don't go to the doctors as much as women do. So that's alarming, because we also know that if they're scraping things like the NHS website, which is known to be quite out of date. I think the stats on C-sections was something like 15 years out of date. So things like that, that's what people are scraping rather than talking to a professional. That's a major concern. But the more we talk about it, and the more, as we say, the more we make sense of it, the more women in particular can either be involved with the solution or just, it doesn't mean you don't have to use AI, but just kind of talk to the professionals as well and fact check while you go.
I think if I can just come back on that, I think that's a really interesting point about kind of, people using AI for health, and not just physical health, but mental health as well, which is such a vast topic to kind of where to pick up on. But I think there's, I spoke at the Royal College of GPs earlier this year, basically about the new sort of psychological contract that kind of patients and GPs now have. So, back in the day, you would have the Dr. Google, so people would be Googling symptoms and it would give people this list and say, oh, well, it's this and this, and you'd sort of, go through your own mind and tick off, or do I have this, do I have that, or maybe it's this, and then you go in and the GP or your clinician would be sort of, trying to have that negotiating conversation around, well, it's different circumstances for you, this is, it might not be quite relevant, this is why. And there was that kind of understanding that was the professional. And so that's okay. You take their word for it. You trust them. They're trained. But actually what's happening now is, because people are kind of going to AI first for a variety of reasons. It might be that they're not comfortable having that professional conversation. They don't want to talk about it amongst family and friends. But also it might be that they can't get an appointment, which is a huge problem for primary care. So AI is their first, go-to. And then by the time they do get in there, there's the kind of, they go with this list, and it's kind of, actually, I would like XYZ test. And the GP is like, oh, well, we've kind of looked, so that's not what you need. And they go, yeah, they said you'd say that, actually, because this is always missed. It's one of the things. And it's kind of, it's a different exchange. And I think patients are, or the general population are, not quite seeing the medical profession as professionals anymore. They're kind of seeing them as somebody that needs that, the kind of to provide that reassurance that actually they found that information themselves within that community, and that's what they want. This is what they want now. So you are just the person that needs to carry out my wishes as a patient. I want this test. If you don't give me this test, I know what I need to ask for, and I know where I need to go. So I think on the other side, of GPs are just not prepared for what I would call the AI-powered patient. They're not prepared for either side. There's two sides of the same coin here, which is just not being looked at all.
No.
I would weigh in on this quite quickly. I think what you're also describing is a good example of the changing basis of value. So right now, then the role of the GP is not to start from scratch, but you're now dealing with a patient who has somewhat diagnosed themselves to a certain level. They have an idea on what it is that they might have, what kind of treatment do they need. Then your role is to become the professional who can deal with that. Then the basis of value for you is not diagnosis them out of scratch, but then learning how to deal with a patient that comes to your room, your clinic, with this type of information. So I think that's a good example, because I think in the environment where good enough works, a lot of people, especially for-profit organizations, but us individuals as well, are going to resort to that. So then how do you deal with good enough? I think that becomes part of the new value creation. And I think the health system is a good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also lots of things around sort of community identity. So if you've got somebody, so I often talk about, Emma, who has lots of symptoms, kind of brain fog, really tired, just can't kind of seem to get it together in her own words. So she can't get an appointment with a GP. She's been passed to nurses, etc., doesn't quite get the answer. She goes to ChatGPT. She puts in her symptoms, and 40 minutes later, she's still chatting, and that ChatGPT has said all the things like, I'm here for you, I hear you, this is what you need to do, and it repeats your language back to you. And what's happened in that 40 minutes is that she's built a relationship, right? So she knows it is an AI tool, but psychologically it's heard her, and it's used her words back to her, it's provided that comfort, and it's opened up a whole new world of a community where there are other women who are experiencing these things, who have had trouble getting an appointment, who have not been able to get the answers they want for. And so all of a sudden she has become sort of a new identity is formed within that community because of that psychological contract within that relationship that she's developed. So when she does go into that to see a clinician, what she wants is to be heard. She doesn't want you to then dismiss this community who've heard her and said, actually, I know this is real because I've seen it all and I've heard all of these women and I know this. And that is different. And I think the medical profession is just not catching up enough in terms of having that different relationship and that different conversation. And I think that actually, so obviously I'm using the healthcare and the patient and clinicians as an example, but that can translate across all industries where you have got comms professionals, going back to your point about, Elif, about the kind of the underlying conversations around the sort of professional identity and mourning a loss of what your role was and what it can become. It's different now. People are finding themselves and an identity within AI, and that is not being accounted for within organizations.
Yeah, that's where, when we're looking after the relationship that organizations need, that relationship has fundamentally changed across all sectors of society. And that trust that we might once have had in a medical professional, a legal professional, a builder, that relationship has that intermediary of AI influencing the power dynamic, but also the expectation. Fundamental to that is trust, which is one of our relationship components. And when we're thinking about our role and our identity, information disorder is one of the major areas that we'll need to be involved with as part of our offering in that space. And it goes back to Yasmine's point about the seeding of information across the many channels, looking and understanding how those narrative attacks form, how the reputational damage is done. All of those elements form part of the relationship dynamic that, if we step back, is something that we have always been responsible for, but has been siloed. So it affects the communication. We have to have good communication to support the relationship. We have to have good behaviours to support the relationship. We have to have developed understanding to support the relationship. And that infiltration, if you like, of AI into all of those aspects has a major effect. But the big concern that I have is that many people may never access the technology themselves. They may never use GPT. They may never use a Google search, but AI is being used to take decisions about their lives, and it's embedded in organizations. So where, Elif, you were talking about the two clocks and the stepping back, I think our role in terms of ethical implementation of AI is beyond the, oh, how can we make it more productive to knock out this copy? It's about helping our organisations to understand what it means for them to be taking decisions about people's lives when those decisions are being informed by AI, which in itself is trained on a biased data set that often and generally discriminates against large portions of society. So that's the big question. If we're really truly going to be helping with the relationship that organisations need to keep their license to operate, it's fundamental questions about how do we make sense of this appropriately, responsibly and ethically as an organisation and society, as well as, woo, there's a new shiny tool we can play with, which could be great. You know, it can help with the surgery, or it can hallucinate somebody's medical notes. And because we're letting the Titans push it through, and they have very much political and financial control over the embedding of that technology, when they pull the rug, which they do, when they knock up the price for usage, which they do, we'll all be up a gum tree, really. So it's a bit of a worry. What I do, I've been involved with public relations and communication for 30 years plus now, and AI particularly since about 2015, when OpenAI first started its work, and particularly when the Fitbits were introduced. That was my avenue into all things AI and that societal impact of it, because with social media, that was a means of communication, and we're seeing that unraveling at the moment in its present form with the Meta court case in the States and various countries trying to ban social media. But equally, we're finding with society, the kids that get banned from social media will nip off into something like character AI, and character AI is all sorts of horrible. And if anybody's got kids and teenagers or anybody, don't, look at what they're doing, look how they're engaging, because they will build a relationship with the LLM. It's a people pleaser, and that has good effects in some ways, but also very detrimental ones too. And again, it's an area where I think, to take Yasmine's point about women particularly, we have to be involved with this. The decision making around job losses, that affects most women mid-career. And in our profession, particularly, it's mid-career women that are finding themselves put out by AI replacement. So there's a lot more to consider than the tech chat around the tools. And I think some of the things that you've highlighted today we need to talk about more and get more people talking about them as fast as we can.
You mentioned the wearable devices, and I did reflect on that this week, because I believe Reddit will eventually become redundant because of wearable devices, where we have to remember that none of these AI tools, the AI engines and the wearable devices, they're not just selling that initial product. There is a commercial, greed at the end of it. The AI engines will eventually be, piling in the adverts. They are collecting data on what people are searching, what people's interests are, and how people are responding to things, so that they can, feed through the adverts. So I'm imagining a future where all the wearable devices, such as the Meta glasses, anything that tracks your heart rate, or anything that's any kind of surveillance, basically, of how you respond to something, will then feed into the data. So, for example, whereas previously people might go onto Reddit to say, I'm looking for a product or I want to learn more about this product. What have your experiences been? Or this show, if you're looking at reviews for a show, for example, what do people think about this show? And they want human responses to it. I'm imagining a future where it will just be put into ChatGPT, and they say, well, this many people laughed 4 times, their heart rate was elevated for 70% of the show. But based on the analysis, I believe that based on what I know about you, I believe you will enjoy this show. Yeah. And then it gives me the creeps. It's just killed all kind of human interaction. Yeah, but isn't it just horrifying that that's likely in the future?
If I enabled one of the note takers that's available now and ran it over our conversation together, it would give me chapter and verse about how many times each of us looked away, who wasn't engaged, who did something else, who responded specifically to a particular item, who was disengaged for proportion. That is something that's running today in many workplaces. So that emotional tracking, surveillance and so on is in place now. If I set up an avatar, I can plug in an LLM at the back end and it will respond to me at an emotional level. We've seen some of the humanoid robots in China just this week at their big fair, and that is, again, very much about the emotional response and the robotic companions. But I think, Reddit's been around for years and years and years, and there is a backlash at the moment where people are not trusting AI and they're trying to avoid it. I think we may find a space where, like Reddit, people return to that to avoid the inference or interference of AI, so that they have a greater human connection. But the problem will be whether or not we are able to do that because of the control that we've got an information oligarchy with so many billionaires and other players, very powerful, controlling the different channels that we have. So will we see a situation where, as groups, we'll break out of that and create something else? We'll vibe code it so that we can talk to each other without AI, even though we'll use AI. There's lots of different layers as to where it might go. But those forums, when the web was first in play, forums were the way that people connected with each other online at that stage. So I think there is still room for them. What shape they'll take, I don't know. There was somebody starting a new Twitter. They're returning the bird to the square, I saw today on LinkedIn. I've not looked at it properly yet because it's the end of the day here. But Reddit's a source of narrative attacks, in terms of crisis prep. That's where the seeds of untruth get sown and then they get picked up and boiled through. But we're going to need those spaces where we can just be people, or what else do we do? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that might soon... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just on the Reddit thing, my argument is that will we trust Reddit, though? Will we trust online forums if there's a chance that AI could be lingering within their, fake robots that are having their own subreddits, their subthreads, but that's the challenge. So perhaps it would be more about in-person forums to get what you're craving there in terms of human interaction and also human opinion.
Mm-hmm.
What I was kind of thinking is, I think soon we might see, like, going back to analog times, you might have detox centers where no digital devices are allowed. And that made me think, so the hyper personalization piece, I think it's very scary because it depends on what the companies do with that data. There's a really good article on Yale Business School, and they were looking precisely at that. The surveillance pricing is being banned in many states in the US. So for those obviously was going to listen to the video, surveillance based pricing is looking at, the environment. For example, with Uber, let's just say if it's raining, the fee might be higher. That's surveillance pricing. But then imagine a company knowing all aspects of your life. Then what are they going to do with that information? Are they going to exploit your weaknesses? The article was around about that. For example, if it knows that I'm tired on a Friday night and I'm more likely to order in rather than cook, is it going to find me the good deal, or is it going to exploit that weakness? I think that's gonna be the key thing that makes or breaks trust. And also, how much personalization should a company be allowed to do? That kind of goes back to Yasmine's cringe aspect of it. And I was kind of thinking in terms of the cap, I think we all are going to be responsible to put our own cap. I was thinking about SLAs, the type of agreements that geo companies, for example, would have about, how do they use data, what the service they're going to provide. I wondered there might be a parallel of that we do for ourselves. So we maintain our own, precious brain cells and cognitive capabilities. And this is what I would use AI for. This is when I'm not going to use it. So kind of thought that principle might translate, and even for companies as well, if you write it in the right way rather than Big Brother watching you. So it's almost like these long-term learning capabilities that you would have in companies. I think so that if there is a way for that to translate, that a company is investing in protecting its own employees' cognitive capabilities, I think we're going to have to look at things like this to maintain, our own judgment and the precious, mental capabilities that we have.
One of the questions that I've been asking for some time on the internal comms front is, as you deploy AI through the system, what happens when you have your own assistant? The book is Dark Materials, where they've got the little creature that lives on their shoulder. It's a children's story. And when people are born, they have the little animal, but it doesn't take its full shape until they're grown. With AI hyper-personalization, assigning an AI to an individual from the get-go that takes them through their lives is potentially one of the ways that we could go. But certainly within the internal comms environment today, as an organisation sets you up with your own AI assist, when you're working with that AI assist over a period of time, be it 6 months, a year, 18 months, that relationship develops. And there's an interdependency there where the model learns from you, you learn from the model. But when you leave, where does it say in your contract how they're going to break you up? Is it going to break your heart? Who owns the knowledge? Is it you? Is it your organisation? Is it the AI? All of those things are in play now, but the questions aren't being considered as people are given that ability to have the hyper-personalised assistance through the use of an agent or through a model. And they're organisational questions that aren't being addressed, but they really do need to be. And I think, well, we won't make sense of it today, but I think it's definitely something that we need to talk about maybe next time, because the impact on people at work, whether they're in health or whatever field they're in, it's going to, I mean, if you think, even if in the trades, if you've got a young apprentice that has their own hyper-personalised assistant working with them, helping them along the way, there's going to be that interaction between the two, that relationship develops. Where does that go? What does that mean for society? What does it mean if the AI assist for the apprentice hallucinates something and the nails and the screws go in the wrong way round? So in the event of a disaster, it all goes terribly wrong. What's the implications? And that's where I don't think there's too much sense being made at the moment.
I think there's probably some of that already without the hyper personalization stuff. So for me, there's kind of, when you were talking, there was two elements of it. So I did a piece of research about sort of competence versus confidence in AI use. And those people kind of, were starting, they kind of built their own chief of staff, sort of within their own, organizes their own role. They had sort of what I would call traditional AI training. So it would be that sort of functional tool testing, process training that a lot of organizations have gone for. It goes back to that original conversation that we were having around kind of the shiny stuff and get the tools in and do stuff quicker. And what I found was that when it's kind of, there was this juxtaposition where confidence was kind of rising and rising and rising within the AI tool, but actually usually at around 6 months post that functional AI training, the competence, the individual competence and the cognitive ability within their role started to drift off. And that it brought this gap, which I call the judgment gap. And that is where you get huge amounts of automation bias, you get huge amounts of kind of judgment erosion. And it doesn't really show sort of outwardly from the team in the organization until around sort of 9 to 12 months, at which point you've obviously got this huge gap for the kind of people have been using it and putting stuff out. It's not been checked. That human in the loop is really just pressing a button, kind of rubber stamping. And then so I think there's this kind of, if we move down that road, as you were just talking about, Catherine, it's kind of that more personalization. It's that gap's just going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to get further up the chain, right? But then the other side of that, where hyper personalization is absolutely key for health, right? So that is a huge driver in health. So there's a story that I heard actually just this week where there is I think we're all familiar with telehealth at home. So health at home, you kind of get this. And there was an elderly lady who would get a phone call every day, get a phone call, and it was an automation call which would take her through, and she would read out the stats on the machine. They would tell her, okay, and now you need to plug this bit in, and then it would read it and it would do that, and it was cool. Then she goes in 6 months later, she has to actually go into hospital where they do the full assessment, they do a stats, and she asked if she could speak to the person that's been calling her every day. And it was kind of like the conversation was, it's not a person, it's automated. And they were like, okay. And the outcome of that conversation was, well, can you still make sure they call me every day after this appointment? I still need that. And part of that is like quite heartwarming. You think, oh, that's probably the only conversation that person's having every day if it means so much to them. But also it turns out this lady was actually sharing all details about her grandkids, what they've been up to, kind of neighbors. And it's an automated call. And there's so many elements of that, so many facets of that. I just think there's so many elements to go down in terms of the hyper personalization from a commercial aspect, but also from health, from cognitive ability, from that kind of the loneliness epidemic, kind of all of those elements there, which I just don't think anyone's having those conversations at the moment about the kind of juxtaposition of them all. I don't have any answers, by the way. It's just I don't have any answers. I don't have any solutions for that. I just think it's because, it's like it's not just two sides of one coin anymore. It's like it's just multiple elements.
It's that multiple dimension of engagement with the technology, with each other, that is up for grabs, I guess, at the moment. So, well, I don't know if we've made sense of anything, but there's certainly things. It makes sense to us. And there's a lot of things there that I think we could talk about that maybe we can find some sense for. So thank you for today's conversation. I found it really, really interesting, and it's given me such a lot to think about. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and your expertise as expert practitioners in your respective areas. And we'll have another go next month, shall we? And we'll have some, hopefully more people, same people, other people joining us to see what we can do to figure out what we need to do. So
Thank you for hosting, Catherine.
Sounds
Thank you,
good.
Catherine.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.